Hai, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. How's life? I hope you are in a good health. On this occasion, my group will provide an analysis of the novel entitled Of Mice and Men that written by John Steinbeck. This story is quite simple about the friendship of two people who try to protect each other in the midst of their shortcomings, covered by a setting and the nuances of the labor that are so obvious with the characters represented by workers. George, Lenny, Candy, the worker who has a work accident and only gets cleaning work, and Crocs, the nigger who excelled because of his different skin color. Then there is Slim, the foreman, who typically feels he is above the workers. He was a ranch owner's son, curly, and his wife had a seductive nature. Our group members contain three people: me, Salma Adilah, Fahma Ardiana, and Hamratuz Zahra. And now I will read the summary of the text from chapter 1 until chapter 6. Make sure you listen to the audio well. The story begins with two childhood friends, George Milton and Lenny Small, who travel through California in search of work. Lenny is drinking from a bottle, and George chides him. When Lenny stopped drinking the water, George reminded that they had only a short walk until they reached the next farm. George noticed that Lenny wasn't really listening. Instead, Lenny focused on stroking the dead mouse was in his pocket. George mentioned that Lenny took the habit from Aunt Clara, then reminds Lenny that he always kills mice. George angrily threw the rat into the forest. The two men stayed in the forest for the night. They had dinner with nuts and talked by the fire about their dream of making enough money to buy their own land with rabbits to care for. The next morning, George and Lenny arrived at the farm and meet their boss. The boss told them they should arrive the night before. Thanks to the late arrival, they had to wait until the next day to start work. During the conversation, George talks for himself and Lenny, which frustrates the boss. However, once Lenny finally spoke, boss agreed to hire those people. Next, George and Lenny meet Curly, the boss' son. Curly tries to intimidate them, especially Lenny, but once he's gone, they learn some gossip about his character from Candy, one of the breeders. Candy explains that Curly is a good fighter who made it to Golden Glove final, but he was made at Big Guy because he's not a pig. Curly's wife appeared briefly and introduced herself to George and Lenny. Lenny couldn't take his eyes off her, but farm workers warned him to not talk to her and describe her as a vulturous person and a whore. Lenny is restless about having to fight Curly, but George confides him and instructs him to go to their designated hideout if a fight starts. Lenny and George also run into the other two hands of the breeders, Sim and Carlson, and learn that Sim's dog recently gave birth to a puppy. At the apartment, George and Slim meet. George thanks Slim for allowing Lenny to take one of the puppies. As the conversation continues, George tells Slim the truth of why he and Lenny left their previous farm. Lenny, who loves to touch soft things, tries to stroke a woman's red dress, making people think that he has raped her. George explained that Lenny was a gentle person and he never raped the woman. Candy and Carlson arrive, and the conversation turns to the topic of Candy's old dog. Candy cruelly loved the animal and didn't want to let it go, but he also realized that the dog was suffering. Plus, according to Carlson, we can sleep with him this beach in here. Kenny finally agrees to let the dog go, and Carlson takes the dog away with the shovel to end this life. Later, George and Lenny discuss their plans to save money and buy their own land. With childlike appeal and hope, Lenny asks George to describe even more elements of the agricultural imagination. Candy overhears the conversation and says that he wants to join using his own savings. George is initially skeptical, but he finally agrees to let Candy join in on his plan, confined by the fact that Candy has saved up a lot of money. The three men agreed to keep the plan a secret. As they make this agreement, an annoyed Curly shows up and starting fighting with Lenny. Lenny doesn't want to fight and begs George for help. Curly punches Lenny in the face and against his own promise to protect Lenny. George encourages Lenny to fight back. In nervous realization, Lenny grabbed Curly's first and squeezed it. As a result, Curly began to flop like a fish on a rope. Lenny and Curly are separated, and it becomes clear that Curly's hand is crushed. He was rushed to the doctor, but not before and the other agreed to not say a word about what had happened to the other person. After Curly was taken away, George explained that Lenny acted like that because he was afraid. He then tried to calm his friend down by telling him that he didn't do anything wrong and that he could still take care of the rabbits on their land. That night, after everyone else had left for town, Lenny went to the farm to visit her puppy. He walked past Crook's room, an African-American stableman who lived in separate inn because other farm workers won't let him into the flats. The two men began to talk, and Crooks asked some probing questions about his relationship with George. At one point, Crooks suggests that George would not return that night, which scared Lenny, but Crooks calmed him down. Lenny was mistaken that he, George, and Candy were planning to save for their own plot of land. Upon hearing this, Crooks called the idea crazy and said that everyone wants a little piece of land. Nobody gets land. It's just in their heads. Before Lenny could answer, Kenny walked in and joined the group. Conversation also discussing their plans to buy a land. In this case, Crooks once again expressed his doubt, although Lenny and Candy remained unsure. Unexpectedly, Girlsys Wife shows up, mentioned that she is looking for Curly and catches the attention of the three men when she teased them. The men told them that they don't know where Curly is. When she asked how Curly injured his hand, the man lied, saying that his hand was caught up in the machine. Girlsys Wife angrily accused the man of covering up the truth, and Crooks sends her away. This response angered him even more. She threw racial nicknames at Crooks and threatened to be hanged. Helpless, Crooks looked away and apologized sternly to her. Candy tries to defend Crooks, but Girlsys Wife responds that no one will trust them over her. Before sneaking out, he said that he was glad Lenny crushed Girl's hand. As soon as Girl's Wife came out, the three men heard another farmer's hunt. Lenny and Candy returned to the apartment, leaving Crooks to himself once again. The following afternoon, Lenny sat in the kennel with a pup who died from his root touching. As he buries the corpse, Lenny worries that George will find out and that the revelation will cause George to forbid Lenny from raising rabbits on their farm. Girls's wife entered the warehouse. Lenny said that he shouldn't talk to her, but they talked anyway. Girls's wife described her youthful dream, now shattered, of becoming a Hollywood actress, as well as he hated for her husband. Lenny then told Girls's wife about how he likes to pet soft objects such as rabbits. Girls's wife let Lenny stroke her hair, but Lenny grabbed it too tightly and she screamed up in her gasp. Lenny shook him so hard that his body felt like a fish and broke her neck. Then he ran away. Candy finds Girls's wife's body in the warehouse. He runs to get George, who immediately realizes what Lenny was up to, decide that they should go and let the others find the body. Once Girly learned of the news, he quickly decided that Lenny must have killed him. Girly and the other farm officers set out to kill Lenny in revenge. It's just that they can't find Richard Carson's gun. George is supposed to join the search party, but he slips away. Knowing that Lenny has gone to the predetermined hideout, Lenny sat by the river, waiting for George and worried about he would wreck. He started hallucinating. First, he imagined that he was talking to Auntie Clara. Then, he imagined a conversation with the giant rabbit. George arrived at the hideout. He assured Lenny that he would not leave him and described the land away would share, which comforted Lenny. As the two men spoke, George could hear Cully's search party approaching. He raised Lord Carson's gun behind Lenny's head so that Lenny couldn't see it. George hesitated at first, continuing to calmly tell Lenny about their farm, but before Crowley and the others arrived, he finally pulled the trigger.
Intrinsic element of novel. The theme is about people's life. Background their setting is in the bushes when Lenny is hiding, in the barn when Lenny rocks Carly's wife, in the river, and in the California ranch. Setting of atmosphere is an atmosphere that is so unsettling is when Carly's wife is found lying lifeless. Time setting is in the afternoon is when searching for Lenny, and night when George tries to kill Lenny. Characterization. The first is Lenny. He is dumb and dependent on his best friend George, but he is also kind and still childish. The second is George. He has passion in his life and has a soul of understanding towards his friend Lenny. However, he also has a selfish nature, as evidenced by when Lenny got into a very big problem he didn't want to get involved, so he had to kill Lenny with his own hands. The third is Slim. In this novel, his character is not very depicted because he is only an additional character. The fourth is Carly. His authoritarian nature, namely by bullying his own employees and being selfish and vengeful when he is angry and wants to find Lenny who has hurt his wife. The fifth is Carlson. He has a special envy, especially to Carly. The sixth is Carly's wife. In the novel, she is a pushy. The seventh is Candy. His nature cares about other people, but he does not consider everything he does. Now, flow. The plot used in this novel is the progressive plot. Language style. The language style used is English. However, this novel has been translated into an Indonesian language. Novel using easy to understand language which was translated by Isma Biku Salamwardi.
Okay, the next material is Extrinsic Elements of Novel will delivered by me, Fahma Ardiana. Author Biography. John Steinbeck, whose full name is John Ernst Steinbeck, was born on February 27, 1902, Salinas Valley, California, United States, and died at the age of 66 on December 20, 1986, New York, United States. He is a writer and one of the most famous American writers of the 20th century, and his most famous work is The Grapes of Wrath of Mice and Men. He received the 1962 Nobel Prize in Literature. He worked as a laborer while writing, and his experiences made the depiction of workers' life in his stories authentic. He spent most of his life in Monterey County, California. During his writing career, he authored 33 books, with one book co-authored alongside Edward Ricketts, including 16 novels, 6 non-fiction books, and 2 collections of short stories. He is widely known for the comic novel Tortilla Flat and Canary Row, the multi-generation epic As of Eden, and the novellas The Red Pony and Of Mice and Men. The Pulitzer Prize-winning The Grapes of Wrath is considered Steinbeck's masterpiece and part of the American literary canon. In the first 75 years after it was published, it sold 14 million copies. Literary value: a unique relationship, or it can be said that a very strange relationship, between Lenny the big dumb giant and George the little who is understanding, is fictitious and may not exist in real life. This clearly has the essence of the novel. Literature as a work of art, of course, that can be enjoyed by anyone. The last is moral value. The moral value that we can get from the novel is to respect and still provide understanding to others without considering physical condition or other conditions. Okay, that's all from me and my group. Thank you so much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.